Greetings, comic book fans and fellow citizens everywhere. It's Saturday afternoon, and this is Middle-Aged Cartoonist. I've got some free time, so that means it's time to work on the good old comic books, because a good comic book artist's work is never done, but if you do it right, it's always fun. So here, behold the impromptu studio of Middle-Aged Cartoonist. This is what a finished comic book looks like. Comic book averages 35-40 pages, each one done by hand the old-fashioned way. Here are some examples of single pages, not yet assembled into a comic book, nice and colorful, thanks to our friendly neighborhood local printer. These are pages that are not yet complete and colored and ready to be sent in. And I'd like to introduce you to our flagship character, the Mighty EnergyGirl, or Energy Woman, sometimes called by her fellow citizens in her fictional hometown of Fairview, the Super School Marm. Unlike many other heroes, this is a lady in her 50s. She was born with a very advanced DNA structure that led to amazing development in almost every attribute of her human being. Besides the obvious ones you see here, she is very strong, she's very fast, she, even down to the oxygenation of her blood, which is at a much higher level than that of mere mortal man and woman, and of course that is where we get our energy from. Thus the name Energy Girl, except that that's what she tells people. The real reason she chose that name, her street name, is Ellen Peabody, and when she was a teenager finishing her hero exams with finals just a week or two away, she still hadn't come up with a name. And when her mom marched her upstairs and says, "Don't you come down until you've got a superhero name," she started just grabbing at heroic sounding words beginning with E. And then said, "This is wasting so much energy, why don't they just pick one for me?" And then realized, Energy Girl. That's another story. Anyway, I'm just, when I have some free time, I like to work on either full comic books or shorter adventures called vignettes. And often they just start with a single humorous idea or kernel that can grow eventually into a comic book. So here we have just a simple idea. We've got a very frightened mobster in the foreground here. This is the ever-popular Nutso Morelli. I mean no harm to the Italian community. It's just that this fellow has an Italian name because it sounded good for this guy. We have villains and bad guys from various different nationalities, and none of them are meant for anybody in the real world to take them personally. Anyway, Nutso is part of a gang that relocated from Chicago to Fairview because they weren't doing too well in Chicago, and they were hoping the pickings would be easier in a smaller town. What they didn't count on is this gal, Energy Girl's town. And so we don't know exactly what's going on here, except that Energy Girl, looking a little less than happy, is advancing in a rather threatening manner, and Nutso, talking to his boss on his cell phone, is saying, "Boss, we gotta go. We're parked on the tracks, and it looks like there's a freight train coming." Well, in a way there is. So here we have the next picture, trying to take that earlier humorous drawing and develop that idea into a story. The next step would be to say, all right, Nutso's in trouble and Energy Girl is approaching. Now, what is the trouble? What happened just a moment before this picture, and what happens just a moment after? And that is where stories come from. I usually start in the middle somewhere, and this is a perfect example. As Nutso's talking into his phone, Energy Girl is saying, well, 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 looky who we have here. That looks like Mr. Nutso Morelli, but you see it can't be. Well, why not? So this is going to be our next page. All I've got is text in so far and a pencil sketch of Ellen, but the text, she is saying, you see, the real Nutso Morelli wouldn't be out here loitering around downtown looking to make trouble. The real Morelli knows he's got a court date 15 minutes ago, and the real Nutso Morelli would never hurt and insult poor Energy Girl by failing to show up. Well, there's what's going on, and that explains why Energy Girl looked irritated in the previous picture and Nutso looked worried. He is supposed to be in court and he didn't show. So she's obviously going to take him in by force so he can meet his court date. Now what happens after that is something yet to be written, but you can see we've gone from a single humorous picture now to 2 pages, and we've got the nucleus of a story beginning. Why is Nutso due in court in the first place? and what happens when he gets there. We've got enough grist in the mill to take it from here, but what I'd like to do now to close this is just work on a picture on this page to show you the construction side now that we've talked about the writing side. The first step, of course, is to get the text in. You want to give it plenty of room, and you want the word balloons to be big enough that they don't swallow up the letters of the text. Since the pictures will reflect what the text say is going on, the text has to come first. The next thing we do is we do just a light pencil sketch to get the limbs in the right place and in the right proportion to each other. Ellen has a hand on one hip. She's leaning back and probably either fingering Nutso with her other hand, poking him in the chest, or she's got him by the tie and is pulling him close as if to say, I think you'd better do what I say at this point. Now, Nutso may have some thoughts of his own, but we'll leave that till later. Okay, the next step, I like to use this very, very fine point permanent pen. I use permanent black ink for the outlines, and then I use water-based colored ink for the insides, because the permanent outlines keep the water ink from bleeding into itself by if it goes outside the lines. Okay, now as I've said in past episodes, I am not a starving artist, but I am poor enough that I can't afford to hire a photographer. So I've got the camera in my left hand and the ever-popular pen in my right, and I will do the best while I'm drawing to keep the picture on what's going on so you can see what's going on. But if I should wander a little bit, so sorry, my apologies. Now, Ellen is in profile here, Energy Girl, but we want to... I usually build the whole face around where the nose is. And this will be no exception. Those of you who have been readers know that Energy Girl, even though she is very strong by human standards, she's not an alien, she's not bit by a radioactive bug or something, she's a human being, but she's ever the much more so than most normal human beings. So she, even though she is very strong, she takes her responsibilities to use what she has very seriously, and she is privately a very gentle person. But sometimes in the course of doing her job, she's got to come across as threatening and intimidating, and this is one of those times. Now, Energy Girl and the Nutso and his friends have a long work relationship going by this time, and actually they're kind of fond of each other. You'll seldom hear them admit it openly, but Nutso and company never really do any things that are really bad, and Ellen never really roughs them up very much. They just kind of keep each other in line, all in the course of a day's work in comic book land. Don't you just love comic books where nobody really gets hurt? Don't you wish the real world were that way? Even though Ellen is in her mid-50s by this time, the same advanced DNA that oxygenates her blood and does all that other good stuff also makes her age a little more slowly than the rest of us. So after 30 years of fighting crime as a professional superhero, and 30 years of vigorous exercise, and 30 years of dealing with what we call her super constitution, even though her strength is not dependent on her muscle size, we do want to show the effects of years of this on her body. So we both make her quite muscular, and also because she is female and she's got 30 years of good old raging hormones, we tend to pump up her female attributes a bit as well. This is not done to get people all worked up, but simply because A, it makes sense, and B, all heroes are exaggerated. We want them to be in a number of various ways larger than life, and not just in the obvious, but in every way. Heroes are who we aspire to be, and as such, they tend to be, at least they used to be in the good old days, always just a bit larger than life. There we go. People sometimes ask me what these bumps are up by Ellen's neck, and that is, if you have ever looked at a bodybuilder, every muscle has a function, and the muscles that hold the shoulders up to the neck and connect them with the clavicles in the front and the shoulder blades in the back, when these are well developed, they do tend to bunch a little bit like that. Fortunately, we can balance them with Ellen's hair. Now, why do we do it like this? You've heard me say in the past, obviously Ellen is wearing a uniform, but it is a long-standing tradition in herodom to show and exaggerate almost every single body joint, every single muscle definition, and then paint the uniform on top of it. This gives a person a more heroic look. So Ellen is not wearing clothes. It's just as you have to put the door frame in before you can hang a door from it properly. You have to put the body in underneath, and then you put the clothes on over the top. For those of you who say, gee, he prattles on like he's just making it up as he goes along, you're right. These little movies are completely unscripted, which means they're a bit rambling, but oh well. Like I say, someday if I get rich and famous, I will buy myself a photographer and a script writer, and I can just sit there and draw my little heart out, and they can do all the rest. But right now, you're stuck with one size fits all here. So what I'm doing now is we can fool the eye into thinking something is three-dimensionally by adding, shading, and cross-hatching. We say, because the sun does not equally hit all shapes at the same time, if the sun is up here and coming down like this, parts that are turned away from the sun, like the side of Ellen's bosom here and the back of her very wide shoulder area, would not be getting as much sun as her direct front. And so by shading a little bit there, we give the illusion of three dimensions, when of course it's all fake. However, you learn tricks of the trade. You also learn that for a muscular person, their body is made up of a lot of round shapes. So you can see that in addition to the obvious round shapes in the front, oh, did you hear what he said? Let's not go there. You can see that on the side, her shoulders are a round shape. Her triceps and biceps are both round shapes that we can kind of shade like that. The muscles of her upper lower arm, is there such a thing, are kind of a round shape. And as we get down into her legs, her thighs, all of these are more round shapes. Makes it quite easy to shade and give some perspective. One last thing before we close and wrap this up is notice we even exaggerate the pose. Having hands on hips is a heroic pose. It's an assertive pose. But here we actually bend the person backwards a little more than they would in real life to accentuate the authoritative look of this human position. We get the feeling that pretty much everything, because remember that cartooning is a visual language, and so everything we do is trying to communicate without words what we want to say. So hopefully, if I've done this right, this little drawing says hero, it says female hero, it says strong, and it says perturbed, all without a word. This is Ken Bailey, middle-aged cartoonist, and having rambled on long enough, I release you to resume your weekend. But to those of you who are so inclined, remember what we did. We started with a single humorous page, and then we said, what's going on? Why is he scared? Why is she annoyed? We put in words to explain it. We then said, what happened before this? What happens after this? We then went on to a page showing what happened immediately after, and we can then go on by adding pages before and after, eventually expand into a complete comic book. I'll give you a little hint. This comic book, 35 pages, started with this single page. What is now page 7 started out as a single humorous idea that grew into a whole book. So there you go. Now it's your turn. Have fun. We'll see you on another Saturday. Middle-aged cartoonist, signing